Mr. Anderson?
Dr. Connolly?
So I understand that we haven't met the targets for the last 3 years, but I'd like to know, are we making any progress? We may not be reaching the goals set by the state or the federal government, but what are we actually doing?
We are definitely making progress. We ran our LRE data about a week ago, and right now our data is showing that we're up above 45% of our students are now in general ed for 80% or more of the time, which is a pretty big bump from what the data showed was 39.9%, I think. So we are making progress.
Mr. Dunn?
Lisa, what can the Board of Education do to help solve this problem?
Gosh, that's a big question. You know, one, support our efforts to be more inclusive with our students, which I think you all do, and I very much appreciate that. I have heard other boards advocating at the state level for a different funding formula for special education so that we can fully serve our students. Victor, I don't know if he'll want to chime in on this, but special education is funded by the state level for your total ADA. It has nothing to do with how many students you have on an IEP. So when you're in a county or in a district that's declining enrollment, your actual special ed funding goes down because it's based on ADA. It's not based on the population that you're trying to serve in the district. So there's a lot of policies and regulations that really interfere with us being able to do a good job. Your question is a great one. I would love to have time and provide more detailed answers. Those are the first ones on the top of my head.
You also mentioned CEIS, and that's our game plan for solving this problem. What's that stand for? Coordinated
Early Intervening Services. It's a requirement the state puts on you to write that to correct when you're in significant disproportionality. And having worked at a district that was already SIGDIS, I can tell you it's a laborious process, and I do feel like we have the expertise within to be able to do this and that we don't need the state to tell us how to do this. I think we have great teachers and educators and a committed staff, but if we don't, then CDE requires us to write up the SACE plan.
I spoke to my wife and I spoke to my daughter this afternoon at 4 o'clock, who are both special education teachers. And they asked me, would it help if we had more electives in art, music, and PE for special education students to participate in as their general ed requirement? Would that help?
You know, that's a good question. When we look at our students' schedules right now in middle school and high school, electives is actually one of the opportunities they do have in general ed. That is where we have a lot of our students accessing the general ed time. I don't know if more would get at the core issue that's in our LRE data. Where we're finding where we want more access is supporting our general ed teachers to have differentiated instruction in the general ed classroom where there's core curriculum. Because we also want to try to improve the achievement rates as well in their language arts and math.
Mrs. Everett.
Thank you. I have a question. So I looked into this a little bit, and there is the free appropriate professional enhancement, which is FAPE. Is what the acronym is. How does that? I guess maybe explain that a little bit, and how you are deciding which students are moving into more general education classes. How are we targeting those, and how are we ensuring that that it's not a lack of students that are meeting this, if the reason why they're not there is because of the FAPE. So
FAPE stands for Free Appropriate Public Education. And each student that is found eligible for special education, an individual education plan is written for that student, and the overall document, the IEP, is what the student's FAPE is, and that includes IEP goals. So that is actually the biggest part of any IEP for a student, is what goals are we targeting with the students. And then from the goals, the team discusses, well, how are we going to help the students make progress on those goals? And so sometimes that's direct speech services, occupational therapy, time with a special ed teacher, things like that. Once you've identified what the service level is, then we need to talk about, well, where is that service going to be delivered? So there is a saying in special ed that you don't qualify in special ed in the categories of science and social studies. You qualify, or you may qualify, because there's deficits in your reading development, or your numerical sense, your math, or your writing. Those are your fundamental skills that allow you to be successful in different content areas. So when we're thinking about trying to be more inclusive for LRE, we're trying to focus more on when our special ed teachers are pulling students out for time with a special ed teacher, it is really to get at those core skills, the reading, the writing, and the math, because that's what we write goals in. We don't write goals in U.S. history. We don't write goals in health. We don't write goals in keyboarding, a few others, right? But we have special ed teachers teaching some of those areas because we don't have our kids in general ed accessing them. And that's what we're trying to revisit, is having them go back in for other content areas with support to the general ed teachers.
And then, so there's something called extended school year. How does that work into the 80% when they do I guess that's over the summer?
Yeah, extended school year is only over the summer, and it does not get calculated into the percentage for LRE. To participate in extended school year, it is for students where we have data that says the regression they experience over the summer is much more significant than students without the disabling condition, and the amount of time it would take that student to recuperate the skills that they lost would also be substantially more than the typical recoupment time. So extended school year is a very separate situation, and it doesn't go into our LRE data.
Mr. Anderson?
Dr. Connolly?
So Leanne Holland, when she spoke, she talked about the challenges of students moving from school to school and of students not attending the same school as their siblings. Could you explain how special education services are resulting in that happening, and what are the challenges with reducing that phenomenon?
So school districts are obligated to provide the full continuum of special education services, and part of that continuum is special day classes, or classes where students spend more than half the day in a special ed setting taught by a special ed teacher with other students with an IEP. The district is not required, though, to have an SDC on every campus because you may not have the number of students that would go into those classrooms, so the district has to offer them from a district lens, but not from an every school site lens when you're thinking about the full continuum of special ed. So for our district, because we have quite a few small elementary schools, we don't have the full continuum made available on every campus. In terms of the continuum being a separate classroom where there could be small group instruction taught by a special ed teacher for the majority of the day. I think one of our hopes is that we start expanding the opportunities for our students, so to stay at their home school, and we work with our general ed teachers and the special ed staff that are on those sites on how we can support the student accessing general ed more, and that they don't require a special day class, because I don't think we want one on every campus. That isn't the direction I would want to go, but we want to see more of them in our general ed setting. Yes.
Who's on the task force?
Which task force are you?
One Lisa doesn't want to go to.
Yeah, the task force we hope to never get on with.
Oh gosh, with CDE.
So who would be? Is it just CDE and one or two of us, or are there other
Oh no, here there would be a lot of us. There will be teachers, parents, administrators, potentially board member involvement, definitely superintendent involvement. It's a pretty wide swath of stakeholders that are required to be on the task force.
But in terms of
CDE.
Sacramento representatives, CDE is the only organization that would be participating.
Yeah, they have staff that do this full time because so many districts struggle with this, and they would be sending designated. I forget what their term is. The acronym is FUMTA, which totally doesn't mean anything to you. But they will be here. They come to us then almost monthly to monitor our progress and provide support.
Thank you very much.
I really want to thank Lisa for bringing this forward, and I think this goes back to the way we've worked through our reorganizations over the course of the last 6 months, because now we've got a dedicated department that's able to, one, share the information with the board in a presentation like this and our community to let them know that, you know what, there is an issue and we are being transparent and we know we've got to make corrections to how we're servicing our students. And the other piece is we have someone as well in a department that can focus on what our corrections are before we get into SIGDIS and those type of things. So I do commend Lisa not only for her presentation tonight and the information, but also our instructional team and Lisa's team for the work that they did last week with our principals at our principals meeting, because I think I saw an aha in a lot of our principals' eyes about what this really means. And prior to that point in time, we talked a lot about looking at master schedules and inclusion and those type of things, but I don't really think they made the connection. And last week's principals meeting, I really saw them digging into their data and really starting to brainstorm how we can address this matter at each of our sites. So thank you.
Thank you very much.